So before we begin this show, I want to make a few official statements. Number one, I do not want to take my own life. I have no desire to die, and if I do die in the next couple of months, you know who did it. Number two, you can independently verify the facts presented in this video by visiting the resources posted in the description. And number three, all opinions presented in this show are solely those of the producers and host of The Conspiracy Files. All parties are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Now, with all that said, let's take a deep dive. Jeffrey Epstein is a name that's synonymous with conspiracy. I mean, there's an absolutely insane amount of strange events and evidence that surround both his life and his death. And the conspiracy is what's the most interesting to me. What really happened? Who was Epstein? How many victims did he have? And who were his clients? These conspiracies surround Epstein's bodyguard, who claimed he tried to talk Epstein out of trafficking minors, but later recanted his statement and said he never saw anything suspicious. The conspiracy surrounds Epstein's private island with its strange blue and white temple, rumors of underground tunnels and sex parties, and we're gonna get into that later. This conspiracy surrounds Epstein's associates, many of whom have been involved in other investigations and a couple of whom actually have died under suspicious circumstances. And obviously the conspiracy is really amplified with Epstein's death. A death ruled to be a suicide, but questioned by millions of people across the world. Personally, I don't believe that he took his own life. That's why I'm wearing this hat. And I also have this little sign that says this sign didn't hang itself, because that's just one of the sure things about this case that, I don't know, it's crazy to deny it just based on the circumstances. But the question remains, was Epstein murdered? Who was he killed by? Was he killed to protect some of his high-profile clients that he was dealing with? Was his assassination ordered by a government? Did he really just take his own life? Those are questions we're going to be asking today as we dive deep into Epstein and the whole globe of just darkness that surrounds him. This is an important video, so please try to pay attention and take something away from this, because this is still happening everywhere in America, all across the globe. Sex trafficking is a major issue, and on this show, in this series, we're going to be diving really deep into seedy, disturbing, dark criminal underworlds. So the format of The Conspiracy Files is going to follow a pretty simple template. First, in each episode, I'm going to explain to y'all the official story, basically what the government or people in power say happened in these situations, what the police said, what they ruled after people's deaths, or you know what I'm saying, the investigative findings from the officials. We're going to walk you through that. Second, I'm going to present to you basically the explanation of the theory and pointing out some reasons as to why people may have lied to us. And number three, I'm going to take you all through evidence. So we're going to look at facts. We're going to look at inconsistencies in stories. We're going to look at testimony. We're going to look at evidence that says that that official story that we read at the very beginning is not true. Now, obviously, the government likes to lie about a lot of different things. All parties, all administrations are not completely honest. And obviously that bleeds down to the cops that run police departments, that bleeds down to authorities in any position of power. I mean, what did Ronald Reagan say? If a man knocks on your door and says, "Trust me, I'm from the government," run. I can't remember what his exact quote was, but it was something like that. After reviewing all these cases and looking deep into these files, I think I've grown a lot more distrustful of those in power, because the evidence in all of these stories is overwhelming and it's blatantly obvious what happened in some of these cases, but it's still officially ruled in one way. And even though people bring stuff up, it never gets changed. And like Epstein, for example, before we start on this, where the hell are all the clients? Where are the people that Epstein supplied these minors to? What happened to them? Why have there been no prosecutions at all dealing with these actual pedophiles that victimized minors? It's truly bizarre when you think about a billionaire running a pedophile sex trafficking operation with a huge network of clients across the globe, and nobody's gone down for their part in any of this besides 2-3 people. I mean, it's crazy. But let's get into it. So here's the official story. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier and business consultant who reportedly made his money working for the wealthy elite, earning clients such as Les Wexner, CEO of the parent company for Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works, and Apollo Global Management Chairman Leon Black, both of whom would later be implicated in his crimes. Jeffrey Epstein worked for companies like Bear Stearns, consulted for companies like Hoffman, these are big names in the financial industry, created J. Epstein & Co., the charity organization, the COUQ Foundation, and was linked to the Southern Trust Company. So Epstein's criminal career started all the way back in 2005, 14 years before his death, when a 14-year-old girl went to the police and reported that she had been molested at Jeffrey Epstein's residence. Now, after she came forward and these allegations were made public, many other girls started to come forward and say, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein has assaulted me and there's something going on here. So with this one person that decided to go tell her true story, many others emerged and felt like it was the right time to tell theirs as well. So 2006, Jeffrey Epstein is actually arrested for charges dealing with minors. But in a crazy twist, he was given a plea deal, which is called a sweetheart deal. Basically, it's like the best situation you could possibly be in, the best outcome for a criminal like Epstein, by Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney in Miami. So there's a lot that we're going to get into with that, but just keep in mind Epstein was alleged to be a pedophile. Many victims came forward. He was given a sweetheart deal and basically a slap on the wrist. This deal was discussed with Epstein's lawyers and ultimately accepted. His charges were then reduced to solicitation of prostitution instead of multiple counts of unlawful sex with a minor. Now just keep that in mind. Basically, all the pedophile side of things, that all got dropped. The dealing with minors thing got dropped, and Epstein was just nabbed with prostitution at that point. Nothing to do with the minors. This secret agreement also ensured that Epstein and his associates would not be investigated by the federal government. Because of the acts of his lawyers, Epstein only received 18 months in jail. But it was after Epstein's release when many women started to come forward and accuse Epstein of assault. Fast forward to 2019. This is when Epstein really was pushed into the national spotlight. It's funny because I remember my friend Kevin telling me about Epstein 2 years before any of these allegations came out, so it was pretty well known that he was doing all this stuff. But 2019, Epstein is arrested at the Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. And this time, the arrest was different. Epstein had been indicted. He was accused of running an international sex trafficking operation with a massive amount of victims, a massive amount of people involved. And obviously, this is when all the celebrity names and the politicians' names all started coming out because they were associated with Epstein. So Epstein is put into prison. He's put in a holding cell, obviously. So July 23rd, 2019, while he's in the Metropolitan Correctional Complex in New York, Epstein that morning at around 1:30 a.m. is found barely conscious, barely breathing on the floor of his jail cell. Epstein had marks around his neck, looked like he tried to take his own life, and that's what the prison guards and the people on the staff there just assumed, that he tried to end it all. So when asked about what happened, Epstein actually told the authorities there that a man named Nicholas Tartaglione, who was Epstein's cellmate, who himself was a ex-New York City cop who had turned into a drug dealer and eventually murdered 4 people, Epstein said that cellmate, the cop, tried to murder him. Later on, that killer cop said that he tried to save Epstein, not silence him. I don't know exactly what that means. The incident was listed as a suicide attempt, but the possibility of assault by his cellmate, and even of the whole situation having been staged, hasn't been ruled out. That's another just strange facet. I mean, so bizarre. So bizarre that they let Epstein into a cell with a quadruple killer. Epstein's like the most high-profile criminal in all of America, and you put him in a cell with a convicted killer. It just doesn't make sense. So after this, Epstein was taken to the Special Housing Unit, or SHU, to be placed on suicide watch. He was even given a new cellmate, a man named Efren Stone Reyes, and it was protocol that a guard look in on him every 30 minutes. So all of Epstein's close associates and jail psychologists stated he was in good spirits at the time of his suicide watch. Epstein told the psychologists who observed him that he had no intention of killing himself, that he was afraid of pain, and that he was a coward. Now, this is really important. We're going to come back to this later. Epstein constantly telling everybody around him that he didn't want to take his own life. So when Epstein's suicide watch ended on August 9th, Epstein's cellmate was then transferred to another cell. The protocol at this specific prison stated that immediately upon having his cellmate leave, Epstein was supposed to be given another cellmate, but that didn't happen. So this left Epstein completely alone in his prison cell, with nobody really there to watch him or even alert authorities if he tried to take his own life. The night of Epstein's death, the prison officials allowed him to make an unmonitored phone call. So Jeffrey told them that it was to his mother, yet, as it came out later on, she had already been dead for several years. A later investigation by the Attorney General revealed that the identity of the person on the other end of that line is still unknown. They just call this person Individual 1. This has never been explained who Epstein called the night before his death. So the media suspected that Jeffrey Epstein had called his then-girlfriend, Karina Shuliak. And earlier that day, during a meeting with his legal counsel, Epstein had excused himself to go make a phone call to his family. So, I don't know, he was making a lot of phone calls, almost like he knew something was going to happen. Or, inversely, I guess, if he was going to do something. Finally, the morning after that random call to that person that's never been explained, before he could expose anything, before he could expose any information, any politicians, any celebrities, before he could walk anybody through any part of the case, he was found dead. Man, it's just, that sentence alone should convince you that there's something going on here. After his death, though, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's known associate, was brought up on charges of participation in Epstein's crimes. Eventually, as you might know, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison on June 28, 2022, which, America, we don't give very long sentences to predators or pedophiles, which I definitely don't agree with. 20 years for what Ghislaine Maxwell did, not nearly enough. You guys know the official story now, so Epstein, first charged with, doing things with minors back in 2006, got off on a sweetheart deal, was allowed to roam free, resumed his sex trafficking operation, was finally arrested again in 2019, but before he could give any details about his organization, his activities, who was involved, what were they doing, he died. And, yeah, it's very suspicious. But let's first talk about how Epstein could have and did die when he was under, or was supposed to be under, constant supervision. So looking at some of the details of what happened the night of his death, it's clear that the entire correctional facility was massively incompetent to the point of criminality. But there could have been something else at play that evening. So earlier failures could be noted within the correctional facility, like for example, when Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell with bruising around his neck on July 23rd of that same year. And then Epstein told the guards that this man had tried to silence him. But something strange is that the footage from outside of Epstein's cell on that night disappeared. This isn't the night when Epstein died. This is the night when there was an apparent attempt on Epstein's life. That footage is completely gone, so nobody knows exactly what happened. Nobody's able to look back and check on footage because for some reason it mysteriously disappeared. So at first, the footage was stated to have been preserved, and this is interesting. The prison officials actually said they had this footage, but later investigation proved that the footage had been from the wrong tier of the complex and that the video no longer existed. The prison legal counsel also tried to find this footage, but they could never locate it. So this isn't the first time we're going to hear about disappearing footage here. Let's keep going. So how could this have happened? Well, the prison legal counsel looked up Epstein's cell number in the correctional facility to make sure the footage was safe. However, the system showed that Epstein was on a different floor and kept in a different cell than where he was actually housed. In other words, the prison's records of where Epstein was held were incorrect. Now, whether that's deliberate or that happened to happen to the nation's most high-profile criminal, I don't know. I mean, you have to understand, these mistakes, I get that people make mistakes, but Epstein at the time was all over every single major news network. He was the highest profile criminal in all of America. And, I mean, just right now, just at the beginning of all of this, they're starting off by putting him in an incorrect cell or marking him down as being in the wrong cell so they don't have any video footage of him. I just think it's really fishy. But officials also claimed not to have watched the footage at the time so they could ensure it was the correct footage. Why'd they fail to immediately watch it is my question. Their reasoning was that an MCC staff member had confirmed that the footage was preserved. And while that makes no sense on its own, it later becomes very clear that there was a systematic failure happening here at the MCC, or the prison where Epstein was being held. This event is known as, in this whole thing, as Epstein's first attempt to take his own life, even though Epstein claims that his cellmate tried to kill him, but we'll never be able to know exactly what happened because, sadly, this footage is just gone. So, on the night of Epstein's death, this is when it becomes clear that not only is there a pattern of failures here, but this is much more than a simple, innocent mistake. There's something nefarious going on here, in my opinion. So, August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein is found kneeling on the floor of his jail cell. The report of that morning states as follows. 6:33 a.m., staff found inmate Epstein unresponsive in his cell. Staff reported to bedside of inmate and attempted to wake him. Control announced medical emergency. CPR initiated. But soon after it was announced that Epstein had died, there was massive outrage in America. This was the guy that held the key to dismantling and figuring out who had been involved in this extremely high profile, extremely widespread sex trafficking ring. And he was already dead. You're in prison. The whole point is that they have you there, not only so that they can keep questioning you and figure out, your crimes and the scope of your crimes, but they also put you in there so that you can't get killed. No one can harm you, really, and, they want to protect you, but, it's just crazy. So who were the guards that night? This is something interesting that we can start to examine. The guards' names were Michael Thomas and Tova Noel, and they'd been employed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center beginning in 2007 for Michael and 2016 for Tova. These two MCC officers that were responsible for Epstein's security were later charged with fabricating records. How interesting is that? They were charged with lying, making fake records and reports. The records stated that they had completed over 75 mandatory checks on Epstein in the hours before he died, but those records had been falsified. They didn't do those checks. It was confirmed that they didn't check on him for more than 3 hours. In fact, it was proven that both guards had been asleep for a 2-hour period of their watch. They had also been shopping online or using their phones, going on social media, texting for most of their shifts. So while the most high-profile prisoner in America is in your cell block, your job is to guard him. He already tried to take his own life. They recently took him off suicide watch. He ends up in his own cell completely alone, and you two guards don't check on him for more than 3 hours. You're the only ones responsible for him, and instead you just sit and play on your phone. It's just crazy. The stuff that happens here, it's just crazy. Now, this is just another failure, I think, because Jeffrey Epstein had been on suicide watch, which dictated that he was supposed to have a cellmate. He had been transferred to the SHU, or Special Housing Unit, and that cellmate of his, Efren Reyes, was moved into his cell, but then, against protocol of the prison, Efren was moved out, leaving Jeffrey Epstein completely alone in there, which is completely against all of the orders in the prison. So something else that seems small but laid out the entire foundation for Epstein's death was that the guards assigned to him overlooked the extra bed sheets in the cell left behind by his former cellmate. These same sheets were later reportedly used by Epstein to commit suicide. The guards later were both given sweetheart deals, once again that sweetheart deal thing coming in, to help them avoid jail time for their role in Epstein's death. The two guards were responsible for the apparent suicide of one of America's most high-profile, I would argue the most high-profile criminals, yet both were let off with only 100 hours of community service. So all of this could be chalked up to bad employees. I understand that mistakes get made, that happens all the time. It also could be poor training or just simply failures to follow protocol. But what cannot be called a simple mistake is the fact that the cameras outside of Epstein's cells failed not only once, but 2 times. 2 cameras, both in front of Epstein's cell, mysteriously malfunctioned on the morning that he died. This just gets crazier and crazier. So the FBI, after Epstein died, took those cameras that were supposed to be watching his cell to Quantico, Virginia to study them at the federal headquarters. But the Washington Post later said that the footage recovered was unusable. The Washington Post also said that there was other usable footage in the area, yet the U.S. Justice Department declined to comment. There's footage, there's not footage. What the hell happened to the footage? How do two cameras die in the same area right there? It's never been explained what happened to those cameras. Just chalked up to, oh, mysterious malfunction. There is no mysterious malfunctions here. This is all intentional, in my opinion. So what's the evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered? I think that your mind, if you still think he took his own life, might be changed after listening to this. So with all these failures in the system, is it possible that Epstein was in fact murdered? ABC News states as follows in an article about his death posted on June 27, 2013. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy detailed for the OIG, or Office of Inspector General, why Epstein's injuries were more consistent with and indicative of a suicide by hanging rather than a homicide by strangulation. The medical examiner also told the OIG that the ligature furrow was too broad to have been caused by the electrical cord of the medical device in Epstein's cell, and that blood toxicology tests revealed no medications or illegal substances were in Epstein's system. The medical examiner also noted the absence of debris under Epstein's fingernails, marks on his hands, contusions to his knuckles, or bruises on his body that would have indicated Epstein had been killed in the struggle, which would be expected if Epstein's death had been a homicide by strangulation. So, immediately people tried to just say, don't ask questions, he took his own life, that's it. No. But a lot of people started obviously to initially wonder what the hell may have happened here. A particularly enlightening article from CBS News, in fact, calls a lot of things into question. In the article, 60 Minutes speaks with several pathologists who review photos taken at Epstein's autopsy. 60 Minutes correspondent Sharon Alfonsi spoke in particular with Dr. Michael Baden, who was hired by Epstein's brother to look into his suspicious death. He was present at the autopsy. Now, this is where Michael Baden comes in. Michael Baden is a very interesting character, and he's going to fundamentally change this whole narrative. So, Epstein's autopsy was performed by New York Chief Medical Examiner Barbara Sampson, but in attendance that day was Dr. Michael Baden. Michael Baden has been involved in a lot of different murders and very high-profile cases. He was an expert on the autopsy of Martin Luther King Jr., something else we're going to talk about soon. JFK, obviously another one we're going to talk about soon. John Belushi, Kobe Bryant, George Floyd, tons of different murder cases he's been involved with. He also testified in defense of O.J. Simpson, which earned him the nickname the Celebrity Pathologist. So something interesting is that the pathologists that 60 Minutes, that program, brought on to look at the photos of Epstein and kind of draw conclusions on it, they all agreed that without a photo of Epstein's actual body as it was found in the prison cell, they wouldn't be able to determine exactly what had happened to him. And we still don't have that photo. That photo's never been released, and nobody knows where that photo is. So the article then goes on to say that knowing the position of Epstein's body post-mortem would have clarified aspects of the autopsy. So here's the aspects of his death that can no longer be clarified: the location of the ligature around his neck and the way that the blood pooled after his death. So these experts are saying they need pictures of Epstein's body to make these conclusions. So Michael Baden stated this in his interview: "At this length of time, we still don't have that information. So if this was called a suicide without all that information, it was a premature judgment." The article also stated that there were several injuries to Epstein's body. These were found after the autopsy as seen from photos. Among the injuries found on Epstein were contusions on both wrists, an abrasion on his left forearm, and deep muscle hemorrhaging in his left shoulder muscle. Strange, unexplained injuries. After reviewing the photos, 60 Minutes also noticed an injury to the back of the neck, a cut on his lip, and an injection mark in his arm, though it isn't known if these injuries were a part of the attempt to revive him. So many strange things in there. I mean, an injury to the back of the neck, an injection mark in Epstein's arm. This is being reported by 60 Minutes, a very reputable news outlet, not just some crazy dude like me on the internet. So Dr. Michael Baden said that small burst capillaries found on Epstein's face, mouth, and eyes are often an indication of strangulation, but it was injuries to Epstein's neck that made Dr. Baden call into question the official ruling of suicide. So autopsy photos show damage to Epstein's left and right thyroid cartilage, which sits at the front of the neck, and his left hyoid bone, a U-shaped bone that sits underneath your jaw and acts as kind of an anchor for your tongue. And a particularly damning statement after looking at all this evidence by Dr. Michael Baden read like this. He said, "I've never seen 3 fractures like this in a suicidal hanging, going over 1,000 jail hangings, suicides in the New York City state prisons over the past 40 to 50 years, no one had 3 fractures. So Michael Baden, the pathologist, a very reputable guy, goes on the record and states out of thousands and thousands of cases for 40 to 50 years all across New York and in the prison system, he's never seen injuries like Epstein's that were consistent with someone that took their own life. The pathologist that 60 Minutes spoke with also agreed that the eye hemorrhaging is common in homicidal strangulation, but less common in hangings. In short, Dr. Baden, Michael Baden, believed that Epstein most likely could have been strangled to death as opposed to have taken his own life. So while the official manner of death was listed as pending, Dr. Sampson, the woman who did the initial autopsy on Epstein, came back and she apparently had some new information. She stated that a few days after the autopsy, she had reviewed additional evidence and she changed the ruling to suicide. She has not revealed what that evidence was. Interesting, we don't know what made her change her mind after a few days. Very peculiar. Other inconsistencies are notable as well. I mean, it's possible that investigators did not examine the correct ligature because at least 2 nooses were found in the cell. Photos of the nooses were also taken into evidence. Especially scrutinized were the photos of the noose thought to be Jeffrey Epstein's method of suicide. The guard who found Epstein reported that he had to cut Epstein down before trying to revive him, but the photos just simply don't match up. Both ends of the noose that Jeffrey Epstein allegedly used to take his own life were neatly folded and hemmed. You can see for yourself in that picture, the noose was not cut. So why would a prison guard go on the record and testify that he had to go in and cut him down? Very bizarre. Got to keep an open mind here. So now we're going to get into a little bit of background. Remember that sweetheart deal and Alex Acosta? Why do you think Epstein was given this free pass years ago to continue running this sex trafficking ring? Well, let's look at it. So obviously, there were many systematic failures related to Epstein and his mysterious death. It can't even be clearly decided by all if he actually committed suicide. But one of the first failures and largest questions, especially for me in the Epstein case, was the sweetheart deal that Epstein had gotten years prior, when he was first brought up on charges of unlawful sex with a minor. Why was he protected the first time, and why was he allowed to escape federal investigation? The simplest answer is this. Epstein had ties to a lot of powerful people. Ties to people like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, tons of, ex-presidents, future presidents. And it's thought that Epstein was given a lighter sentence because of his connection to all these people and many more individuals like Prince Andrew. There are over 50 names of celebrities, politicians, and businessmen that have been connected to Epstein publicly now, many of them thought to have spent time on his island. It's also been suggested by a journalist who spent a lot of time around Epstein that he may have bribed Alexander Acosta to get the deal. So Alexander later became the U.S. Secretary of Labor under Donald Trump, but he resigned from his post after the trial in 2019 and Epstein's arrest. Obviously, people saw the sweetheart deal. They saw him get arrested, Epstein, for all this crazy stuff, and Alexander Acosta, the man who basically handed Epstein that sweetheart deal, came under a lot of fire, thankfully. So let's take a look at the deal that Epstein actually made. So the non-prosecution agreement, the sweetheart deal, also extended immunity to several potential co-conspirators. So not only did Epstein get off, so did all the people he was associated with, which this whole thing prevented further charges against individuals who may have been involved in Epstein's activities. So was this to prevent big people in America from getting prosecuted? Was it to protect Epstein's friends? Did they know what Epstein was doing and they, for some reason, wanted him to continue running this sex trafficking ring? I don't know, but Alexander Acosta was reported as saying the following later on. So Acosta alleged that he was told that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence and that he was above his pay grade. Those are his actual words. Epstein was an intelligence agent who was working above Alexander Acosta, very powerful guy already, above his pay grade. So on top of this, back in 2003, Vanity Fair reporter Vicky Ward was told by her editor that they would not run an article that would have exposed Epstein's wrongdoings before his investigation that began in 2005. At the time, 2 young women had already given interviews about Epstein's misconduct, trying to expose him as a pedophile and a sexual predator. They had actually done those interviews with Vanity Fair, but the magazine editor claimed that Vicky Ward's recounting of the details was inaccurate and therefore did not meet their content standards. Yet, Jeffrey Epstein was officially charged with those crimes in 2008. So the editor of a magazine, Vanity Fair, chose to not publish information that could have exposed Epstein sooner. We don't know exactly why, and then he eventually got arrested for it anyways. But how deep does all of this go? Was Jeffrey Epstein actually connected to any intelligence agencies? Well, the answers here might shock you. Why don't we know the exact source of Epstein's wealth? I mean, it's been explained many times, but there's still so many questions as to how he accrued so much money, where all of it came from. Some of the following theories, statements, and facts could resolve some of those questions. So, Lex Wexner, the CEO of L Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works, was one of the clients of Jeffrey Epstein's financier business. So in 2007, Epstein was accused of misappropriating funds from that client, Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, and that took a huge toll on Epstein's consulting firm and his reputation. The firm only managed to make $100,000 in client fees the year after Wexner fired Epstein, and continued to make only $100,000 the following years until 2011. And they reported no income in 2013. Where's all this money coming from? It's crazy. I mean, Epstein had a private island, several luxurious private jets, several massive mansions. And he had his infamous plane nicknamed the Lolita Express. Lolita being a pedophile book and movie. It's crazy. So Epstein, even though you'd like to think that he was not a billionaire. He was never reported to be on the Forbes list of billionaires. His source of wealth continued to be contributed to his hedge fund, yet no records of this fund were ever released. So we're painting this picture here. Where's Epstein's money coming from? Every lead you try to investigate, you get nowhere because nobody can fucking tell where his money came from. Confirmed sources of where Epstein got some of his wealth are as follows. Well, one is from Leon Black, a Wall Street investor, the Apollo Global Management chairman, and a traveler on Epstein's plane, who paid Epstein $158 million from 2012 to 2018. What did he pay Epstein all of that millions and millions of dollars for? Quote, estate planning advice, planning out his estate. Now, obviously, that's way more money than you should ever have to pay for estate planning advice, $158 million. So what he was really spending it on, we don't know. Later, Leon Black, the same investor paying for the estate advice, agreed in 2023 to pay the U.S. Virgin Islands $62.5 million to be released from any potential claims of his involvement in Jeffrey's wrongdoings. So he basically paid off the U.S. Virgin Islands so they wouldn't prosecute him. That screams guilty. That screams very guilty to me. So Epstein's business ventures were also the subject of a number of lawsuits. Epstein was sued in 1988 by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The alleged crime was illegally subleasing the former home of the Deputy Consul General of Iran and charging the tenant $5,000 more a month in rent than the State Department charged him for the residence. The U.S. Attorney's Office lost that case. Epstein was also sued by Citibank in 2003 for defaulting on loans that he took to fund his investments. It's reported by CBS News that Epstein was loaned to by several banks from 1998 to 2013. Citibank was included, but there were a lot of other big names that loaned to Epstein too, such as JP Morgan and Chase Bank, and Deutsche Bank made an appearance. JP Morgan is now keep this in mind for later, JP Morgan is currently making over 200 payments to women that are involved with Epstein or were victimized with Epstein. So, once again, seems very guilty to me. So speaking of victims getting payouts, another lawsuit was filed against Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank I just mentioned. They agreed in May of 2023 to pay $75 million to settle a lawsuit. The suit was filed against the German bank for knowingly benefiting from Epstein's sex trafficking. It was even stated that the bank profited from Epstein's business. That's disturbing to think that a big bank, a gigantic bank, was paying millions and millions of dollars to Epstein for his sex trafficking ring. I mean, I think that needs to be investigated more, definitely. It's really disturbing that a corporation like that with tons of employees decide investing in a sex trafficking ring would be good for business, but I digress. So this is where we introduce Steve Hoffenberg, an American businessman and fraudster. So Steve was basically Epstein's mentor. And in 2002, a reporter for Vanity Fair visited the Federal Medical Center in Massachusetts to go interview him. So at the time, Steve Hoffenberg was in prison. That medical center was for inmates. Hoffenberg was serving an 18-year sentence for a $450 million Ponzi scheme. He had also worked with Epstein, who at the time was a paid consultant. Now, Epstein told Hoffenberg that he had plans to turn Hoffenberg's business into a global colossus, but through illegal methods. Doesn't really seem like Epstein ever took the honest, tried and true way to make his money. He was cutting corners and breaking the law at any chance that he could. Hoffenberg came to learn a lot about the tricks that Epstein was using. That's why he's been able to talk about them. Hoffenberg claimed that Epstein was a professional con man and that the two had worked on many of their schemes together. He said that Epstein did something called playing the box, where the victim of a crime Epstein committed against them would be unable to do anything about the revelation of the criminal activity. Why? Well, they probably didn't want to come out with it because of the social embarrassment they would face that Epstein manufactured, or because the money that Epstein had stolen would be tucked away, hidden somewhere that the victim would never be able to find. This playing the box ties more into another theory that we're going to discuss later on. So Hoffenberg had a lot of useful information for this reporter, and one of the biggest bombshells was the name of another mentor of Epstein, British defense contractor Douglas Leese. Keep in mind, both these guys are super tight with Epstein. Hoffenberg claims that Leese was an arms dealer. While Leese's son denies this, Douglas Leese was mentioned in the UK parliamentary record about the Al Yamama arms deal of the early 1980s. So, at the time, now this is all alleged, but people have testified that this is true. So Leese, this other mentor of Epstein's, allegedly introduced Jeffrey to many people in the arms business. One of the people he met was Adnan Khashoggi, the middleman in the Iran-Contra affair, in which senior administration officials secretly facilitated the illegal sale of arms to Iran. Now, Epstein was later in very close contact in business with Khashoggi, but we'll talk about that in a second. So now, Epstein is connected to one confirmed arms dealer and one suspected arms dealer who was considered his mentor. Was Epstein an arms dealer? Did he take part in these events? Did he fund parts of these events? Did he work with the government on this? Unexplained still. But 3 separate unidentified sources and one identified source told the reporter for Vanity Fair that Epstein's dealings in the arms world of the 1980s had led him to work for multiple governments, including the government of Israel. So Hoffenberg, we're going back to Epstein's mentor who was in prison at the time, also claimed that Epstein was involved with intelligence, which eerily echoed those similar claims made by Alexander Acosta. So to begin with this claim, we need to learn about Epstein's famous co-conspirator, his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was a conduit between Israel and other governments during his lifetime. He allegedly introduced Epstein to Israeli leaders, who then used Epstein as the equivalent of a Russian sleeper agent. The spy agency associated was called the Mossad, or the Israeli Central Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations. This is where it gets really, really bizarre. So Epstein, through Maxwell and Leese, that arms dealer, he told Hoffenberg, his mentor, that he was involved in blackmail, influence trading, and information trading. Epstein also told his friend Hoffenberg that the level of these crimes was serious and dangerous. And it wasn't only this. Epstein also had long-standing ties to Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. And he's known to have met with him, confirmed, up to 36 times. So there are photos of that former prime minister from Israel actually hanging out, chilling in Epstein's townhouse while covering his face. And in photos and videos taken on the same day, young women are seen entering and exiting the residence, tying together Epstein's relation to the Israeli government and his sex trafficking ring. It's all right there, photographic proof. But was Epstein a spy in the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad? And what did he do for them? Well, Epstein claimed that he compromised influential people by recording them doing things that they wouldn't want to be made public. Remember his playing the box strategy that he had used years before? So let's talk about Ari. Ari Ben-Menash, Israeli intelligence agent and handler to Robert Maxwell in late 1980s, stated in the book Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, that Robert Maxwell had introduced Epstein to the Israelis and that his niche was blackmailing American political figures. He also revealed much of Epstein's rumored connections in the book. So, in that book, this guy claims that Epstein was providing young, underage females to lots of powerful, prominent political figures in America. He also claimed that Epstein would photograph and videotape these politicians having encounters and assaulting these young girls, and then he would use those photos and videos as blackmail. So is there any substance to this, and how else is Epstein connected to Israel? Well, let's take a look at it. Epstein traveled to Israel in 2008 to avoid the jail time he would serve in 2009. He strangely returned, though, as he decided to face the music, so when he was in trouble here in America, Epstein fled to Israel. However, what he didn't say was that he had avoided the far more serious investigation from the federal government because of the plea deal furnished by none other, once again, than Alexander Acosta. In 2015, it was reported by an Israeli newspaper called Haaretz that Epstein had invested in a startup connected to Israel's defense industry, then called Reportly Homeland Security, which has since been rebranded as Carbine, which happened in 2018. So after serving his time in jail, that very short time that Epstein was given, he got out and he started bragging to a lot of people that he was basically untouchable. And he said that he had advised leaders like Vladimir Putin, Mohammed bin Salman, who was later revealed as a part of the Epstein documents, many African dictators, Israeli leaders, the British, and the Americans. So remember how nobody could figure out Epstein's real source of income, how he made those millions and hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, he told several of the same people that he made his money off of arms, drugs, and diamonds. Another strange coincidence, or is this proof? Epstein had an Austrian passport. The passport expired in 1987 and had Epstein's photo, but another name. The passport was found in the safe of his Manhattan apartment with $70,000 in cash and 48 diamonds. Pretty interesting, bizarre stuff. So that Austrian passport had been issued in the 1980s and had since expired. However, it stated that Epstein's residence was listed as being in Saudi Arabia. I mean, how bizarre is that? And one of these journalists who had been told about Jeffrey's secret life was Edward J. Epstein, who had no relation to Jeffrey, the same reporter who had suggested that Jeffrey had paid off Alexander Acosta, in that sweetheart deal in 2008. So Jeffrey told Edward, this reporter, that he knew the owner of a deep water port in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa, and that it was a smuggler's paradise. So he told the reporter that he knew the owner of that area so well that Jeffrey was practically in charge of the smuggling port. So was Jeffrey Epstein in charge of smuggling operations off the Horn of Africa? His name was mentioned as a middleman in both Africa and the Middle East, and according to Ari Ben-Menashe, he said that Epstein was known in the intelligence world for his ability to go between different cultures and nations and talk to everybody and smooth things out. So now we get to the big question. Why would Epstein have been killed? What's the purpose of him being killed as opposed to him just taking his life out of some despicable, grievous amount of shame? Well, perhaps Epstein had grown too confident. He flew millionaires and politicians like Bill Gates to Africa pretty frequently, back and forth. And he even did it publicly with people like Ehud Barak, and had framed photos of Mohammed bin Salman on the wall of his New York mansion. Ben-Menashe stated that Epstein had just become a liability, kind of like Robert Maxwell, someone who was a mentor to him. The same reporter, Ben-Menashe, met with former Mossad agent Viktor Ostrovsky, who stated that Epstein probably lost the protection of his powerful friends because of his recklessness and was subsequently arrested. So it's very clear that Epstein had connections to a lot of powerful people, and obviously the implication is that these powerful people were the people to blame for Epstein's death. The claim that Epstein may have been an agent for the Mossad is huge, and its implications are far-reaching, but a theory that hits a bit closer to home for us here in America is this. Many people believe that the Clintons, one a former president and one a former Secretary of State, are the ones to blame for Epstein's death. Only hours after the death of Epstein was announced and people started freaking out, Donald Trump, who was still president at the time, retweeted claims that Epstein's death was related to the Clintons. The popular hashtag at the time was Clinton body count, which actually, so this podcast is completely remaining apolitical. We're not going to get into any politics here. If we talk about Republicans that are shitty, they're going to be shitty. If we talk about Democrats that are shitty, it's just because they're shitty. But I do want to say that we're going to cover the Clinton body count soon because it's crazy. It's really a crazy theory with crazy evidence, crazy unexplainable deaths, murders, some weird suicides. It's a lot to take in. So let's talk about the body count for a second. The Clintons are suspected of being linked to over 50 victims, most of whom died suddenly in freak accidents or by suicide. The people that were linked and are a part of the supposed Clinton body count are a collection of political opponents or people that may have dangerous or damning information that could hurt either of the Clintons' careers. So these allegations have been going around since 1994, when a film called The Clinton Chronicles supposedly linked Bill Clinton and accused him of being involved with many crimes and even murders. So we're going to talk about the Clinton body count on a whole different episode, but briefly, the list of victims includes people such as Deputy White House Counsel Vince Foster, found dead in Fort Marcy Park in Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. His death was ruled a after they found he had been shot in the mouth. However, there was no exit wound. This may or not be a smoking gun or raise much alarm. However, an especially suspicious death linked to the Clintons is Jerry Parks. Parks was the head of security for the Clinton headquarters during Bill Clinton's presidential campaign in 1992. Parks was leaving a Mexican restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas on September 26, 1993, when a man in another car shot him 10 times using a 9mm handgun. Parks' son stated that his father had collected a secret file on the Clintons and that he was going to use it against them as blackmail. So who else was thought to be blackmailing powerful figures in the government and later wound up dead? Epstein. So a frightening trend in the Clinton body count, before we go back to Epstein, is that the victims appeared to have a trend of dying in suspicious These people that died this way include Edward Eugene Willie, Victor Thorne, Christopher Syme, and interestingly, Jean-Luc Brunel, another name tied to Jeffrey Epstein. The most suspicious death tied to both the Epstein case and the Clintons was Mark Middleton, an aide to Bill Clinton during his days in the White House. Now, this is really bizarre. So, Middleton's death was ruled a yet there was no weapon found at the scene, and the former advisor was found shot and tied to a tree with an electrical cord around his neck. He was found at the Heifer Ranch in Perry, Arkansas in May of 2022. Middleton had signed Epstein into the White House 7 of the 17 times that Epstein visited while Clinton was president, so it links to both Clinton and Epstein. Mark Middleton also flew on Epstein's jet, the site of much of the sexual abuse of minors. But why would the Clintons go after Epstein and add him to their roster of suspicious deaths? Well, Bill Clinton has been accused by victims of Epstein for taking a part in the abuse of underage girls. But Bill Clinton, of course, obviously denies these claims. Miss Johanna Sjoberg, one of Epstein's confirmed victims, says that Epstein told her that Bill Clinton liked them young, and former President Clinton traveled with Epstein many times in the early 2000s. So Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre stated that Clinton had been to Epstein's famous island where much of the criminal activity occurred. Hillary Clinton, his wife, U.S. Secretary of State under Obama's presidency, and U.S. presidential candidate, was also named in the documents recently released about the case. So, obviously there's some weird shit with the Clintons. Just look at the painting that Epstein had of Bill Clinton in a dress. I mean, I know there's supposedly some explanation for that, but when you take in the facts, it kind of blows your mind. But who else died that was connected to Epstein? Who may be responsible? Or were these all truly suicides and illnesses? Well, this is the stuff that I think is very interesting. People that were connected to this that died. So let's talk about it. Well, there was Robert Maxwell, the man who may have introduced Epstein into the spy world, who was reported to have fallen from his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, on the 5th of November 1991. Afterwards, 3 pathologists were unable to agree on Robert Maxwell's cause of death. Some considered it to be a heart attack and accidental drowning, but others suspect that he either committed suicide or was pushed from the yacht into the ocean. After Maxwell's death, it was discovered that he had stolen large sums of money from his employer's pensions. And at the time, Epstein was working with Maxwell to resolve his debt issues. And Ari Ben-Menashe claimed that Maxwell had become a liability to the Mossad. Remember, Robert Maxwell was a supposed spy as well. Then there's Jean-Luc Brunel, the former modeling agent, a famous man in the fashion world who was arrested on sexual assault and rape allegations, who was found hanging in his cell, the same cause of death as Jeffrey Epstein. His death obviously was considered suspicious. Jean-Luc Brunel was also suspected of supplying girls to Epstein. One of his accusers, once again Virginia Giuffre, stated that Epstein had bragged to her that he slept with more than 1,000 of Brunel's girls. Hoffenberg, the prison man, the businessman, close friend, mentor of Epstein, was found dead in late August of 2022 in an advanced state of decomposition at his apartment in Connecticut. A positive ID cannot be made because of the advanced delay, but there are no signs of trauma or forced entry. Very bizarre. The husband and son of Judge Esther Salas also linked to the Epstein case, were shot at their New Jersey home in 2020. The son was killed and the husband was injured. So this was a judge that was directly involved in all of the Epstein proceedings, shot, targeted in a unsolved murder, assassination attempt. It's crazy. As of January 9th, Edward J. Epstein, once again, who has no relation, but who was a journalist who spent a lot of time around Jeffrey and who was a certified conspiracy theorist, was found dead at his apartment, according to his nephew, Rick Nessel. So, as of January 9th this year, Edward J. Epstein is dead as well. His nephew said that Mr. Epstein had recently tested positive for the coronavirus, but that the official cause is not unknown. This comes just days after more Epstein documents were released earlier this year. And Efren Reyes, Epstein's final cellmate on the eve of his death, was found in his mother's apartment in the Bronx on November 27, 2020. He died of an apparent COVID-19 infection that he had contracted while at the Queens Correctional Center, from which he had recently been released. He was only 51. So who may have been paying Epstein? These are the big names and who they may be protecting. Obviously, all of these deaths raise eyebrows, but if they were all killed, who was being protected? Well, The Independent reported on January 22, 2024 that over 100 people are named in newly published legal documents linked to Epstein. Everyone on these documents is linked to the case, whether they were a victim, an accuser, or people that had connections to Epstein and were pulled into the lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. Many of the people named in these documents were also supposedly in Epstein's famous Little Black Books. Here follows the list that The Independent posted in its entirety. Ghislaine Maxwell, accused and sentenced for her role in the crimes committed. She met Epstein in 1991 through a mutual friend. The couple spent time with Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Prince Andrew. All three have been named in court documents linking them to Epstein. The first prosecution of Ghislaine aiding Jeffrey in the exploitation of young women was in 1994, when the couple lured a 16-year-old girl named Annie Farmer to Epstein's New Mexico ranch. Prince Andrew is under heavy scrutiny for sexually assaulting underage girls. He denies these claims. It's alleged that Ghislaine directed Annie Farmer to have sex with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions. Virginia Guffrey, another victim of Epstein, also stated that she had been abused by Prince Andrew. Johanna Yelberg claimed that Prince Andrew had groped her at Epstein's residence in Manhattan in 2001. Bill Clinton, a known friend and associate of Epstein's. As stated earlier, rumors abound of Clinton having killed troublesome people in his past already. Some people believe that Clinton may have pulled strings in Epstein's death. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton's wife, is also named in the documents. Donald Trump stated that he had known Epstein for 15 years and considered him to be a terrific guy. He also stated that he's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Yeah, creepy. Trump later stated during his presidency that he hadn't spoken to Epstein in 10 to 15 years. However, a lawsuit titled Jane Doe versus Epstein and Trump was filed in 2016, and this is disturbing, alleging that both men had sexually assaulted a 13-year-old Jane Doe at several parties in Epstein's mansion in Manhattan throughout 1994. So this is Trump and Epstein being accused of raping a minor in the same lawsuit. You got to read those documents. They're absolutely crazy if you've never seen them. David Copperfield, old magic man, a victim of Epstein, claims that the famous magician was aware of the paid recruitment of young girls. The victim in question, Johanna Yelberg, was asked by Copperfield if she was aware that girls are getting paid to find other girls to be brought into the sex trafficking ring. David's a creep. There's a lot more we could talk about there. Jess Stanley, the CEO of Barclay, had a professional relationship with Epstein and is now under investigation by the UK Financial Counsel Authority. Kevin Spacey, also accused of sexual assault crimes, went on trips with Epstein and was confirmed to be flying on Epstein's planes. That one's just obvious. Obviously, the dude's a creep. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed states that he had visited Epstein's residence in Manhattan many times. There is a framed picture of him on the wall in Epstein's home. The wife of John P. DeJong, governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, served on the board of Epstein's financial trust company. Lex Wexner, former L Brand CEO, received financial consultations from Epstein. Les hired Epstein as his money manager and transferred ownership of an Upper East Side townhouse to Epstein in 2011 for $0. L Brands later came under fire for their mistreatment of models. John Connolly, a New York police detective who became an investigator for Epstein. Alan Dershowitz, one of the lawyers who represented Epstein in his first legal battle back in 2006. The co-founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. Hoffman spent time on Epstein's island on what he reported was a fundraising trip. With him was Media Lab director Joy Ito. Bill Gates. Epstein met with Bill Gates multiple times after Epstein's conviction in 2011. They met at least 3 times at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, so Bill Gates was meeting with Epstein after he knew he was a creep and a pedophile. Gates also flew on one of Epstein's private planes to Palm Beach, Florida. There are many notable people named in the documents, as quoted from The Independent. They include Leonardo DiCaprio, Al Gore, Richard Branson, Stephen Hawking, Michael Jackson, George Lucas, Marvin Minsky, Kate Blanchett, Naomi Campbell, Heidi Klum, Bruce Willis, Bianca Jagger, Mick Jagger's wife, Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico, where Epstein owned his ranch, Cameron Diaz, Glenn Dubin, Eva Anderson Dubin, Noam Chomsky, Chris Tucker, Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, former wife of Prince Andrew, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Leslie Groff, Frederick Fekkai, celebrity hairstylist, but we could go on and on. But these are not all the men that were implicated. These are only the ones who are known. One of the loudest voices in this case is that of Virginia Guffrey, a victim of Epstein's sex trafficking ring. She stated in the 2016 deposition that she cannot even remember the names of all those who assaulted her on board the infamous jet owned by Epstein, the Lolita Express. Here follows a quote from the Palm Beach Post. Another prince, I don't know his name, she said at one point during the deposition, describing the lurid turn her life took in 2000. A guy that owns a hotel, a really large hotel chain. I can't remember which hotel it was. There was, another foreign president. I just can't remember his name. He was Spanish. There's a whole bunch of them that it's hard for me to remember them all. So, getting raped repeatedly by world leaders, billionaires, very influential, very powerful people, getting raped by them. It's fucking disgusting that none of these people have been held accountable yet. I mean, it's just crazy. And Epstein, we could talk for hours on all of this. There's the model in New York City who at one point was associated with Epstein, and she took her own life by jumping off of a balcony to her death. There's the fact that Epstein's personal attorney and his accountant are now in a lawsuit because they're being accused of helping fund and furnish the sex trafficking operation that they were directly involved, like managing the business. That's a lawsuit you can go look up that's happening right now. There's the fact that Epstein's accountant went to Epstein's house the day after he died, went in there with a friend of Epstein's and got a bag together and brought out a bag of mysterious items from Epstein's house that's never been explained. There's the temple where Epstein was supposedly doing sacrifices. There's the sundial on his island. Was Epstein involved in Moloch worshiping? Was he involved in some sort of satanic thing? If you guys want me to do a deep dive on Epstein's island and the rituals and all the really bizarre shit that he may have been into, please let me know, because this one is just reserved to kind of the conspiracy itself. But if we want to get into details about Epstein and rituals and the fucking crazy shit that surrounds all of that, please let me know, because I'm down to make a second part of this. But let's get to the closing thoughts for the day. When considering Jeffrey Epstein, it's a monumental task to make sense of the whole story, kind of like I was just talking about, because so many pieces are missing and so much is still to be revealed. And many investigations are still ongoing, so we're learning more almost every day. And as justice is carried out for these crimes, these pieces that we have right now might start to fit into place. But for the present, for right now, what does all this information mean? Questions are still everywhere, along with speculation and intense debate. And as for right now, the full web of Jeffrey Epstein still has yet to be unraveled. But when it is, who's going to be caught in the strings? That's my question. So I'm going to be releasing the script to this episode online. Thank you to Sabrin Chandler Lewis, the woman who helped to write this. She is awesome. I mean, there's just so much more that we can get into here. When you really consider it, I mean, there's so many suspicious suicides over the years in the world, but it's like Epstein. This is a guy that was connected to politics, to celebrities, very, very powerful, very rich people with big influence. It's obvious that if he was busted, all of those people were shitting bricks and they wanted him to die. And then, luckily he killed himself. I mean, I don't see a possible reality where that's the truth, that Epstein just took his own life. I think he had too much to share, too much that he would have on other people, too many connections that he would expose. If I were him, I would just go out with a bang and expose everybody once you get caught, you know? It's kind of like they turn their back on you. I bet that's what they were afraid of fucking happening, that Epstein was going to go AWOL and tell everybody everything. And this is all connected. This is connected to lots of murders, suspicious deaths. But like I said, if you guys want a part 2 where we dive deeper into the island and maybe some of the more timelines of Epstein's whole story, I'd be glad to do that. Thank you guys for listening to the first episode of The Conspiracy Files, by the way. You guys are amazing. Thank you to everybody who stuck out through this whole thing. We're going to be covering a bunch of different stories soon. We have the Franklin cover-up, satanic pedophile ring, which is true, some crazy shit. Pedophile ring in Ireland, JFK, Marilyn Monroe. We're doing some alien stuff. What we're really going to focus here on this show is what I'm passionate about, like government cover-ups, murders that were found to be suicides, and providing people with correct history, because on the Paranormal Files and Murder in America, we get to document modern history. Paranormal Files, we're documenting and preserving older history. I just love history, and being here, being able to talk about conspiracies, which I feel like is a loaded term, because what we're really talking about here is just the truth. Like, all of what we just went through is facts that you can verify independently for yourself. I think with the conspiracy stuff, it's just a chance to rewrite history to a correct narrative, because there's a lot of liars out there. A lot of fucking liars. It's crazy. But thank you guys for listening. I will be back next week, same day, same time, with a whole new episode. I love you guys so much. There's so much more to come. This is super exciting. Keep that tinfoil hat on and stay safe out there. Hey guys, so if you like what you just saw, go subscribe to The Conspiracy Files here on YouTube. The link is going to be in the description and in a pinned comment. I wanted to post this video on here so people actually see it here on the channel and know what we're doing over there. But yeah, we are going to be diving deep into the darkness on this new channel, so please go subscribe, share this video out, help me spread this truth and awareness. And yeah, this is a whole new chapter